Hi everyone. Thank you for checking in at the Inner Game of Change podcast, where we focus on exploring the multi-layers of managing organizational change. My guests cover a diverse number of critical topics to enable effective and sustainable change adoption, including communication, leadership, training, change practice, process design, change capability, and much more. My name is 𝐂𝐥𝐢𝐞𝐧, and you're listening to the Inner Game of Change podcast. My guest today is the award-winning author Kate Christiansen to chat about her book, The Thrive Cycle. Kate is a global adaptive performance specialist who shows people and organizations how to harness the opportunity of disruptive change. I'm grateful to have Kate chatting to me today. Well, Kate, welcome to the Inner Game of Change podcast, and thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Kate, we are here today to talk about or cover some parts of your book, The Thrive Cycle. But first of all, do you want to give a quick summary or a brief about who you are as a professional?
Sure. So I'm an adaptive performance specialist, a specialty that comes from 25 years of leading change and finding my way through disruption in various environments across the world. I guess what I'm most known for is the way we think about change and helping people to unlock new pathways through uncertainty. And I guess making the unexpected more expected, so it's less scary and easier to navigate.
Great. And how many books you've written?
I have so far, well, how many books have I finished is probably... I've finished 2 books, Curly Conversations being my second book and The Thrive Cycle, my first one. But I reckon in the process of that, I think I've probably written about 5 or 6 books and stopped 3/4 of the way through.
Which is not very abnormal for a lot of authors, right?
No, exactly. It's, especially, I think, writing a book is a really useful, although time-consuming way of clarifying your thoughts. And often when they're written down, you go, oh, no, that's not what I mean. Whereas when they're in your head, they can, circulate around like a washing machine and you never actually land them. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think a recent guest on the Inner Game of Change podcast, we did talk about why writing is important.
Yeah. One of the things I hadn't appreciated when I wrote The Thrive Cycle, that I'd finished it and it was ready to launch. And I had this sudden moment of quite intense anxiety, this sudden realization that I was putting my ideas out and on display, like putting them in the window.
Yes. And
actually that you had to front up behind them. I hadn't appreciated that until I wrote that book.
Yes. And I look, talking about the Thrive Cycle, I love it. I've read it and I've taken a lot of points for me to apply in my practice. It's almost like a toolkit or a survival kit for organizations. When you wrote that book, The Thrive Cycle, who was your audience? Who were you trying to reach out to?
It was at multiple levels. So it was in corporate organizations. So reaching out to leaders, what I was trying to do, and I still fundamentally believe this, that the way we think about change and the way we think about disruption, the world has changed, but the way we think about change hasn't. We're still in the 1990s with a lot of our thinking. And what I wanted to do was overcome some of the, the things that have happened as part of industrialization. Many roles, instead of being broad, have gone deep, and the silos and the siloed thinking that had happened with that. And the way that we have as humans to simplify our worlds compartmentalized a single process into parts and then disconnected those parts. And so the Thrive cycle was, my goal was to put the parts back together and to help us connect from the whole world of seeing opportunities all the way through to capturing them and delivering the change that comes from those opportunities.
Great. I am not going to go through the details of it. I'd like our listeners to actually get hold of a copy, and they're available on the major retailers. In your book, you mentioned that most organizations do have a Thrive cycle. They just don't know it.
Yes. Yeah. And so what I meant by that was that the Thrive cycle wasn't really often there are, in the change space, there are methodologies that come in and you need to apply those methodologies or processes over the top of things. What I was wanting to identify with the Thrive cycle was to say, these are parts that you already have. You already do these things. What I'm saying is how you think about them and how you put them together makes the difference between, it's like if you imagine a body and you've got arms and legs and head not working in the same way. What I was saying is you've got all of these things. If you just think about it differently and think of them as one whole, it will enable you to operate in a more holistic way. And if you want to be adaptive, which is what you need to do in a world of change, these things must work together.
Yeah.
So they're there. It's not new. It's a mindset thing.
And how hard or challenging is it for organizations to actually realize that they do have it and how they can put it together?
My experience is, and this is in from implementing both the content in the Thrive cycle, which is big picture strategy, big organization, and at the more micro level in curly conversations, often what people need is they need to see and feel and experience something before they want to look at, okay, how that works. So a bit like I want to hop in a sports car and enjoy, if I was into sports cars, let's say, enjoy driving in that sports car and the experience of that and what that feels like. And maybe sometimes I want to look under the bonnet and see how it works, but I don't really want to look under the bonnet if I don't know whether I like driving in sports cars or not. And I think one of the challenges that we face as change or adaptive practitioners is that we've often tried to teach people the process.
Yep.
And for many people who are aren't change specialists or change people, who are much more specifically action oriented, perhaps more operational in thinking, we've missed the why, and yet we think we're really good at the why, and I don't think we always are.
Yeah, well, talking about the why, articulating the why is an art by itself, and it comes from a high level of leadership maturity to really articulate that and pay it attention. You did mention the word adaptive. So, Kate, there's a lot of talk about being adaptive, being adaptable, and being agile.
Yes.
Can you just enlighten me and just,
What's the difference in from my perspective?
Yeah, yes, please.
Yeah. Look, in the Thrive cycle, I talked about those three concepts because I think often we have dreams about what we'd like to be, and agile is a methodology. So if we take the methodology element out of it, let's just deal with the word, what agility means. Yeah. Agility means an ability to move fast. It means a flexibility, but most of all, it comes around I'm agile, I can jump from one wall to another in a nimble kind of way. And so that's agile. Then you've got adaptable. Adaptable means being able to be changed. And so it's different to agile. It takes that speed, flexibility element out of it, but it brings in the change element. I tend to neither refer to agile or adaptable because I actually think what we need to be is adaptive. And adaptive is the ability to change ourselves based on a particular situation. Whereas the others are about speed. You can be really fast and change in the wrong direction, or you can be adaptable, but you require somebody else to change you. And in the Thrive cycle, even though I talk about organizations having this Thrive cycle and adaptive capability, it applies equally to humans and people and families and all of those sorts of elements.
So, Kate, does that mean, or is it also true to say that being adaptable or agile is a consequence of our reaction to external forces? And adaptive is actually, we don't need an external stimuli. We actually need to, look at it internally as a way of thinking, as a mindset. Am I close to some sort of truth in here?
Yeah, I think that's a really nice way of putting it. Because sometimes when it comes to change, sometimes we instigate it, and sometimes we know we should instigate it, but we don't want to.
Yes.
And sometimes change is done to us, or we feel like it's done to us.
Yeah.
Being adaptive means that it is you, and therefore you are in control, and you're not trying to control your environment around you. You just accept that that's the way it is. So yeah, I love that.
It's probably it's more sustainable and probably more acceptable by teams within an organization, because it's not a sudden, reaction to something.
Yeah, and I think the thing about being adaptive is it's also ultimately it's about knowing what the outcome is. Like everything and adaptive capability comes down to knowing what the outcome is and knowing what challenge it is that you need to address in order to reach that outcome.
Yeah.
And when we accept that, what we get, and we add some structure to it, what we get is freedom within a framework. And when we have freedom, we feel in control and we feel more calm, and we'll be less reactive, and we can think, which is where you sort of start to get into that complex problem solving.
Yeah, and I think it is a interesting way that you call it freedom. I think part of that freedom, or what freedom usually offers us, is also the room to create.
Yes.
And that creativity and innovation is actually part of being free within that construct of an organization.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that in my work I'm, I guess, working with and wanting to nurture is that change. It used to be sort of 20 years ago we were talking about change leadership. And now change leadership, it used to be that the change was over there, and you'd remember this, Ali, the change was over there, and then we have business as usual, and we have our projects doing the change, and then we have business as usual. And as time's gone along and those two worlds have come together, what change leadership kind of, yes, there are still really useful concepts in it, but what it's about is complex problem solving and doing it collaboratively and harnessing the collective intelligence of your team. And it's all about people with process underneath. And when you look at problem solving, often the way it's been done is process over the top. Here's your 5 steps to solving a problem. and it doesn't take into account the people side. And that just, as you know, just leads you down a path that is not going to get you to where you want to be.
Yeah. I mean, the whole idea of why change management as a practice sort of came into being, I think, after the 90s, when process improvement was at its peak, and they realized that, God, we're spending a lot of money on a process improvement, but we're not seeing any results. And that's because the people side was missing from the whole picture.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
In your book, Kate, you talk about 4 different types or profiles of organizations. They're all related to water. Swimmers, splashers, sinkers,
surfers,
and surfers.
Yeah. Surfers.
And I like it. I mean, I don't swim myself, but I like the idea. And I thought about it over the last couple of days, because I tried to categorize the organizations I worked for. And sometimes the organization is a surfer, but they've got a lot of swimmers or sinkers. So, but in general, I would like you to just maybe define the 4 types for us.
Yeah. So where this came from is that I grew up in Canberra, and like all good Canberrans, I used to go down to the coast, down to the south coast, Bateman's Bay, and spent a lot of time when I was growing up in the water. And there were a lot of, while I never was a surfer myself, I spent a lot of time on the beach watching the surfers out in the ocean. And what occurred to me was that the mindset of a surfer is very similar to the mindset that we need as a leader when we are leading through disrupted environments. So that whole adaptive mindset, because a surfer doesn't go into the ocean wanting it to be calm. They go into the ocean wanting it to have a swell and wanting it to have waves. And they don't try to control it. So they look at what's there, and they work with the ocean to get the wave. They don't go, oh, that's a rubbish wave. It's not my perfect wave. I'm not going to do anything with it. And so this was kind of the context for these 4, I guess, personas, if you like. And they were based on my couple of decades of working with organizations like you. And so the surfer is kind of at the top of these organizations, one that kind of takes responsibility for itself and has a mindset of the world, and our world is always changing, and our job is to adapt and make the most of it and get the outcome that we want in whatever the environment is. And so then you get the swimmers, who are the organizations that are very strong, often very, very often large, have often been around for a long time. So they are really good. I think of them as people who can do laps in a pool. Like you put them in a pool, they can keep on swimming and swimming and swimming because they've got it all worked out and they've trained to be able to swim lanes. The challenge for swimmers, so they are good organizations. The challenge is when you put them in the ocean, what happens is they're used to a flat or a calm environment. So when they try to apply the same way of swimming in the ocean, they find it much more difficult. And what they spend is a lot more energy trying to do what they did in the pool instead of doing things differently and thinking differently about what am I here to do.
Yeah.
So that's the swimmers.
Because in the swimming pool, you think of the lanes as the rail guards. So they've got a structure around them, and they've got a length, and they know what that length is, and they know how many laps. So there's a lot of structures in there for them. You go to the sea, and there is no structure. You are exposed
don't know what's in the water.
No, and you're exposed to the elements as well. So
exactly, it's and yet it doesn't mean that they're not good swimmers.
No.
And this is, I think, a fundamental element, not just through the Thrive cycle, but through all of the work that I do, is that one of the things that holds people back and holds organizations back from being more adaptive and better at change is that they feel that if they let go of their being good at swimming, the stuff that they've spent years or decades doing, that they will somehow be less, and that their expertise and what has made them special until now will mean that they are no longer as special. And this applies for people and for organizations.
Sure.
So it's about saying, yeah, sometimes you don't need to be a really good swimmer, and that's great. But for the times that you don't need, when you need to be more of a surfer, what you just need to change your mindset and say, I'm not here to control the ocean, I'm here to adapt to it, as opposed to swimming my lanes and those sorts of things.
Yes.
So that's our swimmers. And then we get to the splashers.
Hi there. Thank you for listening to this podcast. For more podcasts, check us out at 𝐂𝐥𝐢𝐞𝐧.com.au.
The splashes are, I describe them as being, I guess they're sort of the ones who will listen and watch to see what others are doing and then do that. And part of that comes from this innate need that we have as humans. As soon as we find ourselves in unknown territory and facing uncertainty, is we want to get right back to the known, and we want to know, what are we going to do about it? And a splasher is very driven. A splasher organization with this persona is very driven by what others are doing. And if they're doing it, they must have thought about it. So we should do that as well. And there's not necessarily the underlying logic and thought to stand back and ask that question. Well, is that the right thing for us? What is the outcome that we need? Does that deliver that outcome? And it's a way of people feeling like they have certainty when they don't really. They've just jumped on a bandwagon.
Yeah,
so
following a corporate norm rather than they have their own strategy. And is that a characteristic of big organizations? Will be splashers, but probably mid-size and small size?
Can all size? This is organization agnostic.
Sure.
Often, I have seen and studied organizations that were very large that were splashes. It looks a little bit different because they are larger. They make bigger splashes.
Yeah.
Or what you get is different departments all reacting to something that is coming more centrally from the organizations, and you get lots of little splashes happening all over the organization.
I can see a lot of splashing nowadays because there's a lot of talk, and I'm not criticizing any organization, but there's a lot of talk about digital transformation. And I think that's probably, some of them are, they've thought it through, and some of them are just following the norms just because everybody else is doing it.
Yeah, and the digital, going agile, hydrogen, should we be in hydrogen or not? These sorts of things, and I'm not an expert in any of those things. What I do see though is that there can be a tendency when you get these waves of trends, if you like, and a lot of people talking about something, people, that fear of missing out, well, we've got to be in hydrogen, we've got to go digital, we've got to do X, Y, and Z, not because it's necessarily the right thing for their organization, it's because it feels better and everyone else seems to be doing it, and we don't want to not do it because other people must know something different to what we know.
Sure.
So that's from a splasher perspective. And then we have the sinkers. And the sinkers, bless their cotton socks, sinkers are, and look, in fairness, in absolute fairness, you look at this in COVID context, in from a pandemic perspective, I think I would include myself that I've done a fair whack of splashing myself. When we get into deep change and deep uncertainty, often we need to splash around a bit, and this is what the difference between, say, a splasher and a sinker is. A splasher eventually comes together and goes, oh, hang on, I need to do something differently. A sinker just keeps on going, doesn't take feedback, doesn't change the way because it's on a path, and then just can't keep going because the world goes past.
Of course, yeah, of course, and I love it. I'll be using this analogy for a long time, and I mean, they all reflections of leadership, really, and how leadership thinks about whether they want to be in the innovation and the surfing space or they want to be in the swimming space. And ultimately that's where, I mean, at least it's a good place to be, to either be a surfer or a swimmer. But and rather than the other two. Yeah,
and I think something from a listener perspective is that sometimes there can be a perception that innovation is, running around trying everything without a context, and that approach to innovation is actually splasher behaviour. It's knowing where you're trying to get to and recognizing there are 1,000 different ways to get there and trying different ways to get to that same outcome. That is innovation, and that is surfer behavior.
Yeah. Kate, from talking about COVID-19, so over the last, almost 2 years now, what would be your top 3 key observations about how organizations are managing the uncertainty that is associated with COVID-19?
I think the sudden, all-encompassing size of COVID has meant that no organization, no matter how adaptive, I haven't come across an organization that has, mastered COVID. When you lift the cover and you look underneath, everyone's a bit messy.
Yes.
And I think the organizations that have been most successful are, the ones that looked for the opportunity as opposed to seeing the downside. And the ones that have had the greatest challenge are the ones for whom COVID took away their base of business. Not just their customer base, but the base of their business. You look in small business, you look in things that were relying on physical presence, and suddenly you can't do that. Those that were able to go, oh, hang on, but how do we create value? Let's go in another direction. That pivot thing that we talked about earlier.
Yes.
That has been key, but there haven't been many organizations that have been able to do that in my experience. But I'm, as someone who specializes in being adaptive, I think there are lots of people who are still working incredibly hard, being adaptive, and still only just, staying above water. If we come back to a surfer splasher analogy, even when you get a surfer, like an experienced surfer in an incredibly big swell, it doesn't matter how good a surfer you are. Sometimes our environment is so disrupted that what it's about is just holding on to your board.
Yes, yeah.
And I think for many organisations, they're still there. Yeah. Others were lucky enough to not have such big swell, or to be in a position to be able to ride the wave. But there's been a fair amount of luck in that as well.
Yeah, I think it's a fair amount of luck. I think that's probably a fair assessment. Look, my observation, when there was a time of uncertainty, some organizations have shrunk to survive. And that shrinking is reflected in, laying people off, contracts and all that stuff.
Yes.
I would have thought, and I'm sure there are organizations out there that, the retail market pivoted so many times. I would have thought that good leadership will not shrink because that's the natural thing to do. Good leadership will actually look for opportunities rather than shrinking and say, we're going to ride the wave and see what happens later. So I definitely, have seen and observed that shrinking in there. And that is driven by leaders, and which meant that some organizations have lost some good talent, which is not going to go back to them. And the other thing is that obviously the hybrid of working from home, and which is also another interesting challenge for organizations, because how are they going to deal with this particular change? And not many organizations have actually made a stand around whether they would like their workforce to work from home or not. I think everybody's kind of waiting now to see what others are doing.
Waiting to see what others are doing and then applying what others are doing, rather than understanding the outcome that they need. One of the things, I was talking with a leader, working with a group of leaders on this topic, and one of the things we were talking about was, I spend a lot of time thinking about asking the right question and when is the right time to ask a particular kind of question. And what we're doing, and what I'm finding, and what was happening in this leadership team, was they were asking a lot of how and what questions. And there are kind of 7 starting points of a conversation. And that at the top of, if you think of it as a ladder, at the top of the ladder are the what and the how questions. And that's the comfortable side when we get into that action-oriented conversation. So we're saying, what should we do, and how should we deal with working from home? How should we deal with vaccinations? How should we, all of these things that are like a level 6 or level 7 conversation. Yeah. And what I was saying to this team, and what we're doing is okay, let's go back. Let's start the conversation at the beginning, which is around, what is it that we're trying to achieve? What outcome do we want? What are the factors that drive that outcome? How do people and the way that they work relate to that? And those elements, what are the factors that we need to consider? And then how does working from home fit into that picture?
Yes.
How does people being vaccinated and having a COVID safe or COVID appropriate supporting environment fit in that? You see that those layers, people want to start at the top, and that's how you end up with splasher behavior. Oh, it looks like the other organizations in our industry are mandating you work in your office for 3 days a week on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays. Well, is that right for you? Because they were starting in a different posse to the where you were starting from. Does that make sense?
What you're talking about here, and if I understand it right, is that you're going to have to look at the whole picture, because the picture is made of different nodes, and each node impacts everything else within the picture. That's when you're stepping away from it so you can see picture clearly, and then you make decisions based on the best decisions that are suitable for your organization. Because each organization is unique, and their people are unique, and their experiences are unique.
Yeah. And the other thing that we talked about is that I think a lot of leaders feel like they need to make this decision in a room on their own, like executives teams needing to make it in a room on their own. actually, if you engage people in this conversation that I just talked about, and being clear about what the purpose is of that conversation and where it's going to get to and what decisions will or won't be made in it, then actually when you engage people in that kind of conversation, you're already starting to get buy-in and people feeling like they have a voice, because it doesn't matter what the decision is. You can't please all of the people all of the time. But if people feel like nobody was asked, then you're pleasing nobody.
Of course.
Except you.
Of course. We coming to the end of the podcast, Kate, we did talk a lot about leaders. Is there any message from you to teams and individuals within an organization to think about their mindset and take lessons from the current environment going forward? Because the modern organizations and the way we're going to manage change going forward, managing change will have to be a mutual responsibility now between an individual and a leader.
Yeah. I'd say rule number one is start where you are. The number of times I work with leaders who would like to be somewhere else and therefore start their conversation somewhere else instead of starting where they are, causes enormous pain, frustration. And if you just started where you are, it'll make a huge difference. The second thing would be around, it is always about the people. Yes, there are processes. Yes, there are methodologies. People need to feel engaged and they know the answers. So often we go out, look, I'm an independent consultant, right? So, but often what organizations do is they have a problem and they go out to a big consulting firm to tell them what the answer is.
Yeah.
But actually your people know what the answer is. What you need is help to help them articulate and think about their answers.
Yeah.
So trust your people, I guess, would be the second one.
Yeah, great. Start where you are. That sounds like a book you can write, Kate. There's your number 12 book.
There's number 12 book. It's probably half written anyway.
Kate, we are coming to the end of the podcast. It's been a pleasure talking to you. How would people reach out to you?
So you can contact me. You can visit my website, which is 𝐂𝐥𝐢𝐞𝐧.com.au, or email me at hello@𝐂𝐥𝐢𝐞𝐧.com.au.
Fantastic. Yeah, we will put all the details about you in the podcast. But I'm really grateful, and I was looking forward to this conversation, and it's been a pleasure having you as part of the Inner Game of Change podcast.
Awesome. Thanks, Ali.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Bye.
Hi, everyone. I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of the Inner Game of Change podcast. To know more about our guests and this episode, check out the innergameofchange.com.au website. And remember to subscribe. I can't wait to share with you the next episode. Until then, stay well and stay safe.